So, I don't know if you want to break, but so when we have a look at science fiction, there is no such thing as science fiction. I can go way, way beyond everything that you think of as science fiction today, and actually reality is much stranger than fiction. So if you download the codexes, basically then you can see some of these different technologies basically in the codexes. But when we start having a look at the starburst, for example, and we'll go through this in a bit, we have a staggering number of exponential technologies. We have about 650 by my count, where artificial intelligence is just one. And on this particular starburst, we have 3D printing, 3D bioprinting that lets us 3D print human hearts. That's a science fiction technology right there. We have 5G, 6G, we have quantum communications, we have electronics, basically that are self-healing, self-configuring. When it comes to artificial intelligence, we have already 3D printed artificial intelligences. We have also used DNA to create artificial intelligent neural networks that are able to do maths. When we have a look at other spaces, like materials, we have smart dust, we have programmable materials. We even have materials that can read your mind and then send a text. They're called telekinetic and telepathic metamaterials. We also have some other funky things when we start talking about metamaterials, and I'll show you what I mean by that in a little bit. We have biological computers, chemical computers. We even have liquid computers that we have already prototyped. So a liquid computer is literally just that. It uses a mixture of bases and acids to store information, process information, and do different things. We also have photonic computers coming through. We have biological and DNA computers coming through already that you can go and prod and poke. Neuromorphic computers that pack more power than the US Department of Energy's Summit supercomputer into something the size of a fingernail that fundamentally revolutionizes artificial intelligence. And so on and so on and so forth. And we'll go through this in a little bit. But when it actually comes to science fiction, how about this? We all share at least one thing in common. We all have 4 base pair DNA. Now, who's actually watched the movie Promethean? Hands up. Has anyone seen Promethean? Yeah, there we go. Okay, so in Promethean, you know the vats of goo? You know, the android basically goes in, picks up the vats of goo, and it's like this brown, this sort of grey sticky fluid, and it actually contains DNA. We have created organisms that have 6 base pair DNA, 8 base pair DNA, and 11 base pair DNA that in their case not only replicate but are also completely alien to any other form of life on Earth and can never get sick because no viruses can affect them. So when we talk about alien life forms, we have already used synthetic DNA to create life forms that are alive that have not a lot in common with the rest of biological life. When we have a look at black holes, we've already created black holes on Earth, except they're not the giant ones. And in fact, I met a couple of people from CERN, and they said that the black holes that we created on Earth, fortunately, weren't gravitational black holes. But what a bunch of scientists over in Europe did is they focused laser beams at particular atoms. And then they noticed that those atoms were collapsing in on themselves to form what they called a molecular black hole. So literally, we have already created, albeit very, very tiny ones, we have already created little black holes on Earth. Laser weapons. Anyone that does anything with the United States military will know that we are already putting laser weapons onto destroyers, onto F-35s, F-A-18 Hornets, Striker aircraft, and so on and so forth. So laser weapons are a staple of science fiction like Star Wars. They're real. And if you know anybody who's in the military, you might increasingly know someone who is actually using laser weapons. Lightsabers. If you love Star Wars, everyone wants a lightsaber, and Disney charge a lot for these down at Disney World in Florida. But in China, they have created something in the medical field called a plasma jet. Now, these plasma jets are literal lightsabers, but they're about an inch long. So they're used to operate on people, but they are the very definition of lightsabers. Knowledge uploading. About 4 years ago, the United States military worked with a Japanese organization and managed to upload knowledge to people. So in this particular case, they put a whole bunch of Top Gun pilots basically into an F-35 simulator, took the F-35s up to 35,000 feet, put the F-35s into a flat spin. They then recorded the Top Gun pilots' brainwaves, and as those pilots were trying to bring the F-35s back under control, they recorded those brainwaves. And the F-35 pilots basically landed the aircraft and off we went. The US military then put 30 volunteers who had never actually flown before, let alone piloted aircraft before, into the same simulators, took the F-35s basically up to 35,000 feet. They had skull caps on, replayed the Top Gun pilots' brainwaves, and 70% of the people managed to take the F-35s out of flat spins. Now, they managed to do this because the brain is plastic. So as I'm talking to you, you're absorbing information and knowledge. We've just found a way to digitize it. So if you think of Trinity in the Matrix, basically where she goes into the Matrix and she says, dial me up a Huey helicopter. And she goes, I need to learn how to fly this Huey helicopter. And she gets in and the knowledge is uploaded to her brain and she gets in and she can fly it. We've done that. Again, at a basic level, but we have done that. So we've managed to prove that we can upload knowledge to your brain. We can also increasingly edit your memories using a technology called optogenetics and sonogenetics. So we've even managed to teach songbirds songs when they've never ever heard the song. Molecular assemblers. Now, molecular assemblers, there are two kinds of stages for molecular assemblers. We have out of the University of Glasgow something called a chemputer. So the chemputer uses different chemicals and it combines different chemicals together to create pharmaceutical grade drugs. So that's one thing. But Toyota has created lithium ion batteries using viruses, which are essentially a molecular assembler technology. So not only have we used chemistry to create the first basic molecular assemblers that can create products, we've also created molecular-sized robots, put them into a production line, and those molecular-sized robots created a molecular-sized product. But we've also then used viruses to create electric vehicle batteries, which is an odd one. Nanobots. When we have a look at nanobots, we've kind of got these journeys within and everything else. We've already created nanobots and nanomachines that are steered using magnetism and even have their own electronic brains now, thanks to some of the East Coast US universities that identify cancer cells and drill into those cancer cells to kill those cancer cells. So when we have a look at nanobots, basically there's a lot of odd things happening basically in that world. We also have something called triboelectric nanogenerators. Now, a TENG is a kind of nanotechnology that sits in your bloodstream, and this comes out of China and the Far East, and it generates electricity from your flow of blood, and then wirelessly transmits, albeit incredibly low voltages and wattages basically of electricity to the different devices on your body. So when we talk about nanobots, nanobots are here. We've also got nanobot swarms that are at the very early stages of being able to do in vivo surgery. So we've had these nanobot swarms and we've been able to guide them around different mazes and get them to do things. But the regulators will have kittens, and you're not going to see that in any hospital setting for at least 40 years. But the technology exists today because even though we think we're living in this sort of modern day world, we're actually already living in the sci-fi world. Telepathy. When we have a look at organizations like Harvard, MIT, University College of London, as well as many others, we have already managed to read people's thoughts and then transmit those thoughts to other people. We have also, using a platform called BrainNet, which is one word, managed to get people to play telepathic Tetris. So this is where I just think of the moves and basically the system automatically does it for me. So we've already created the first telepathic games. Now, one of the interesting things basically with the telepathic games basically is we use something called a TMS device, which just sits next to the head. And actually it goes to internet scale. Mark Zuckerberg is also trying to develop, along with Regina Duggan, who's the ex-Director General of the US Military Research Center, DARPA, ways to read your mind non-invasively, because in Zuckerberg's own words about 3 years ago, he wanted to turn Facebook into the world's first telepathic network. And on that front, we have organizations like HTC, which can now read your brainwaves while you're in virtual reality, and you can think something and it can create objects or help you navigate around in VR. But telepathy, in terms of I communicate with you using my mind and you hear me with your mind, that's real. But there's all these other things going on around that different space. Tractor beams, courtesy of New York University, but also the University of Bristol in the UK, we've created both photonic tractor beams and acoustic tractor beams. So photonic tractor beams use light, just as we see in Star Trek, to pull different objects towards itself or push them away. An acoustic tractor beam uses ultrasound vortices. So if you think about ultrasound that turns itself into a mini tornado to lift and manipulate different objects in midair. And recently we managed to actually use these tractor beams to build a very small bridge in midair. So not connected to anything, no strings, no wires, nothing, but we managed to build products basically in midair using tractor beams. And that actually has applications basically for the future of robotic-based surgery. When we have a look at warp bubbles, what you see on the screen is the actual warp bubble. Now, it was thought for a very long time basically that warp bubbles would never ever exist. But if you Google this sort of stuff, you'll see all this research. This is the first ever authentic warp bubble, kind of as we see in more Star Trek than Star Wars. Wormholes. Now, we haven't actually created a genuine wormhole yet. Not the ones that we sort of see in Sci-Fi, basically, where I go into one end and I come out in another universe at the other end. What we have managed to do on Earth, though, is we've managed to create magnetic wormholes. Now, what we mean by that is we had a magnetic field over here, and the magnetic field managed to get itself over here, but there was nothing in the middle. So the magnetic field here managed to connect over here, but there was nothing in the middle. Now, that actually has applications basically for MRIs that let you walk around the room while you're having your MRI, as opposed to being stuck in a traditional MRI machine. So magnetic wormholes exist. And then mind reading. Now, mind reading has come a very long way, basically just in the past 3 years, let alone anything else. Now, this little video basically is where we showed volunteers geometric shapes. They had a brain-machine interface, a skull cap on their heads, and those BMIs read their brain waves, and an artificial intelligence then deciphered those brain waves and turned them into the corresponding images. And this is the result in 2019. So this is where we take the information from billions of human neurons to put these images together. So as you can see, these kind of look similar. You can tell that's a cross, you can tell that's a square, and so on and so forth. So this is where we are using brain-machine interfaces and artificial intelligence to interpret the images that people are thinking. Bearing in mind we can already understand full sentences. That's a sort of different BMI kind of technology. But you merge these together and you get some interesting things. Because, for example, I could just say, Don't tell me about what you did on holiday, just think it, and it will automatically project itself onto TV, or you could stream your brain to YouTube. But here's the thing. Technology improves at an exponential rate. This was 2019. This is 2022. So we showed volunteers images of people's faces on the left. So there, on the left. The artificial intelligences using the same technology that we had in 2019 then recreated the images that those people were thinking of, and you now have the reconstruction here on the right, nearest to me. That looks fairly high resolution. So in the space of 3 years, we've gone from being able to read images that are in people's head and projecting grainy looking things that kind of resemble basically the geometric shapes that people were looking at, to this. Now this is increasingly useful, for example, in police photo fits. You can now just think who mugged you, and you now have an accurate photo fit. And these kinds of technologies are actually being used by the New York Police Department, including forensic technologies that mean we can take people's DNA and reconstruct their faces from their DNA profile. So sci-fi is strange. But I talked about metamaterials earlier that could read your mind. But what about invisibility cloaks? You know, I've been doing a lot of work basically with Universal, basically, and Warner Brothers, basically in this sort of theme parks. And if you go down basically to Universal, basically in Florida, you know, they've got a whole Harry Potter setup. So where's Harry? What could you do with a metamaterial? You could create an invisibility cloak. You can buy this for $300. Where's Harry? So that is a genuine invisibility shield, and the US military really likes that technology, as you can imagine. However, there is one technology basically that I have not talked about yet. What about holograms? Now, when we think about holograms today, basically a lot of the holograms that you are shown are Pepper's ghost. You're using augmented reality glasses or whatever it happens to be. But courtesy of BYU, if you know these giant holograms that you see in Blade Runner 2049 with the dancing ballerinas, or you see the Princess Leia holograms, basically where she comes to life and you can touch the holograms, basically you don't need glasses or any gadgets or gimmickry or whatever it happens to be, then this next particular sci-fi that is now sci-fact invention uses femto lasers. These are the real deal when it comes to holograms.
In the holography group, we are working to create the displays of science fiction. Displays like the holodeck from Star Trek or the Princess Leia projector from Star Wars. So most displays, including 3D displays, require you to look at a screen. But our technology creates images that are floating out in space, and they're physical.
This is a genuine hologram. It's this big today, but it gets bigger and bigger and bigger until it's the dancing ballerina basically that you see in 2049. So when I say basically that we have killed science fiction, we have turned almost everything that you think of as science fiction, whether it's replicators, tractor beams, holograms, brain reading, telepathy and everything else basically into science fact. But we also have robots now that are merging their own code. We have synthetic DNA, basically it's 11 base pairs, not just 4. That's it. We have artificial intelligences that are creating other artificial intelligences. We have AIs that are creating computers within themselves that can run other AIs that run computers within themselves and programs. So when we start talking about artificial intelligence, when we talk about going way beyond anything that you see in the movies, I can go way beyond it already. And that is the end of that section. So I hope you enjoyed killing sci-fi with me, and I think we now have time for a little break.